Parker Schnabel thought he had Dominion Creek locked down. $75 million in proven gold, mapped, staked, and secured. But overnight, everything changed. Rick Ness just dropped footage showing massive cleanouts from a ground Parker swears was his. The pay layer, the gold color, even the gravel composition. It all matches Parker's data to the ounce. Within hours, the internet explodes. Did Rick outsmart Parker or steal his claim outright? What started as another mining season just turned into the biggest gold war the Yukon's ever seen. And this time, it's personal. But before we dive in, if you love the real drama behind Gold Rush, the rivalries, the betrayals, and the billion-dollar stakes buried in the Yukon, hit like and subscribe, because what you're about to hear changes everything Parker Schnabel thought he controlled. The story broke overnight. Dominion Creek, Parker Schnabel's crown jewel, the site he built his $75 million empire on, had just been refiled. Not by Discovery, not by corporate, but under a new operator's name. By morning, Parker's crew arrived to find the unimaginable. Access-restricted signs hammered into the dirt, bright red stakes lining the boundary, and on each one the same bold print, Rick Ness Limited. The same Rick Ness who vanished from the Yukon 2 years ago. At first, everyone thought it was a joke, maybe a prank, maybe some clerical glitch. But then came the paperwork. Parker's legal team pulled the filings, and there it was. Government approval, signatures verified, and the Dominion claim officially transferred. Word spread across Dawson like wildfire. Locals swore Rick had pulled off the impossible, buying Parker's ground while he was out filming in Fairbanks. Some said it was luck. Others said it was revenge years in the making, but to Parker it felt like betrayal on a level deeper than gold. By the time he returned to camp, the truth was impossible to ignore. The machines sat idle, security fences wrapped the pay dirt, and the only sound was the creek running through ground that no longer belonged to him. This wasn't a mistake. This was a takeover. For the next 48 hours, no one saw Rick Ness. No statements, no interviews, no posts, just silence. But silence in the Yukon always means something's brewing. Then came the first whispers. Late-night convoys hauling dozers and excavators north under tarp. No logos, no Discovery cameras. Locals at the fuel station claimed they saw Rick himself behind the wheel of a lowboy, his old black pickup following close behind. He wasn't coming back to talk. He was coming back to dig. The pieces started fitting together fast. Rick had been quietly buying up leftover leases, the ones Parker's crew used as staging ground near his main haul road. At first, they looked worthless, but on the new maps, those exact plots formed a straight corridor leading straight into Dominion's richest pay zone. Then someone leaked a permit. It showed coordinates almost identical to the underground pay channel Parker's team spent 3 seasons mapping. Rick wasn't guessing. He was aiming for the heart of Parker's discovery. Still, one question burned hotter than any rumor. Who was backing Rick? Because there's no way he did this alone. That answer came fast, and it hit like dynamite. Records traced Rick's operation to a private equity group out of Alberta, notorious for hostile mining takeovers. The same group that just last year tried to buy Dominion Creek directly from Parker's company and got turned down cold. Now, those same investors were back. Only this time, they weren't knocking on Parker's door. They were standing beside Rick Ness. They gave him everything he needed: fuel contracts, wash plants, loaders, even legal cover. In exchange, They wanted one thing: total access to Dominion's gold reserve. Rick's only demand was clear: complete operational control. And the investors agreed. It wasn't about rebuilding his reputation. It wasn't about a new season or a redemption arc. Rick Ness had come back to settle something personal. He didn't just want ground. He wanted Parker's ground, his maps, his channel, his legacy. Because now it was official. Rick wasn't mining gold. He was mining revenge. And the first target of that revenge? Dominion Creek. To Parker, it wasn't just another claim. It was his empire. $75 million in projected reserves, every ounce mapped and locked into next season's plan. That single site was the backbone of everything: new wash plants, bigger fuel contracts, and the lease on untouched ground further up the valley. So when Rick moved in on Dominion's boundary lines, it wasn't just an attack on a claim. It was a hit on Parker's entire operation. Within days, the ripples started to show. Fuel suppliers hesitated. Truck schedules froze. Even Discovery's cameras paused. The empire that had looked unstoppable now stood on unstable ground. Within days, the calls began. First, the accountants, asking for clarification. Then the investors, demanding audits. By the end of the week, Discovery executives sent a terse message: pause filming until the issue is resolved. Even the camera crews knew what that meant. For Parker, the Yukon gold season had just gone from production to survival mode. He sat in the silent office trailer, Dominion's financial projections flickering on the monitor, and muttered under his breath for the cameras still rolling. Someone's playing chess, and I'm still on the first move. Meanwhile, a few miles away, Rick Ness lit up social media with a single video post. No words, no commentary, just the roar of his plant and a close-up of gold pouring across the sluice mat. Within hours, the clip went viral across mining forums. The gold color, texture, and purity looked identical to Parker's Dominion samples. Too identical. Within 48 hours, analysts from Dawson to Anchorage started connecting the dots. The geological layer visible in Rick's footage matched the exact same pay vein Parker had charted 3 years ago. It wasn't coincidence. It was the same dirt, the same river channel, just from the opposite side of the boundary line. But Rick wasn't calling it Parker's discovery. He called it his own. On camera, his voice was calm, steady, rehearsed. "I told everyone I'd be back," he said, holding a handful of wet gold in his palm. "And this time, I'm running my own ground." He never mentioned Dominion. He didn't have to. Back at Parker's camp, the mood turned hostile. Some crew members wanted to storm the line and block Rick's haul trucks. Others told Parker to go public, show his survey maps, and prove the ground was his first. But Parker knew better. He'd seen this before. Once a fight went legal, every shovel stopped moving. Every minute off the dirt was lost gold. Still, online chatter reached a fever pitch. Forums, blogs, even mining news outlets began speculating. Was Rick trespassing or outsmarting the system? Because if his permits were legitimate, Parker was the one standing on the wrong side of the law. And in the Yukon, possession of a valid claim deed meant everything. By week's end, the situation exploded into paperwork and lawyers. Parker's legal team filed an emergency injunction in Whitehorse, accusing Rick of fraudulent filing, data theft, and unlawful access to proprietary survey material. Rick's camp countered instantly with government-stamped deeds, legitimate on paper, yet suspiciously filed just days before Dominion's last renewal date. Someone on the inside had moved the documents faster than standard protocol. Then the email arrived. A whistleblower from inside the mining office sent Parker a message claiming an official had been bribed to fast-track Rick's registration. Attached were partial timestamps from the internal system logs, enough to suggest the filings were manipulated, but not enough to prove it in court. It was the kind of evidence that could destroy Rick if verified, but also blow back on Parker if leaked too early. Discovery held the footage, refusing to release any new material until the dust settled. They knew a lawsuit could halt production for months, and the network wasn't going to risk liability. So while Rick's excavators chewed through Dominion's outer boundary, Parker was trapped in paperwork, watching his gold bleed away, ounce by ounce, while lawyers argued over who owned the dirt beneath their feet. Every hour counted. Fuel contracts were expiring. Heavy haul leases were coming due. Crew morale dropped to silence. What had started as a territorial dispute had turned into a corporate war, and every decision Parker made now carried seven-figure consequences. In the midst of it all, he sat alone in his truck, overlooking Dominion Creek, the same valley he once believed he'd own for life. Watching Rick's floodlights flicker through the mist across the river. Engines rumbled, wash plants hummed, gold moved steadily through another man's hands. He didn't need a camera crew to tell him what came next. Dominion wasn't just under attack, it was slipping away. Every day the legal fight dragged on, Rick Ness dug deeper, not just into the pay dirt, but into the empire Parker built. And then came the hit no one saw coming. Not from the ground, but from the web. The first warning surfaced on Reddit, an anonymous post claiming to hold Dominion Creek's complete geological data. Within hours, links began spreading across mining forums and Discord servers. When Parker's team downloaded the files, their blood ran cold. It wasn't rumor, it was his. Every 3D terrain scan, every drill log, every yield projection, even the heat maps showing the richest pay zones, all of it, dumped for anyone to see. Dominion hadn't just been stolen in paperwork. Now its secrets were bleeding into the public domain. His office went into lockdown. Computers were pulled offline, drives were checked, and security cameras combed. Within 20 minutes, they found the source. The metadata didn't lie. The upload came from an account belonging to a man Parker once trusted, his former senior surveyor, now working for Rick Ness. Parker drove straight to the line. Cameras followed in silence as he parked beside the Dominion access road. Rick was already there, standing by a loader, arms folded. The air was thick with diesel and tension. "You leaked my data," Parker said, stepping close enough for the cameras to catch every word. Rick didn't flinch. "You abandoned that data when you lost the claim." That line hit like a punch. The words weren't shouted. They were cold, legal, deliberate. Rick turned back toward his wash plant, leaving Parker standing in the mud. The moment went viral in hours. The internet split into two camps, one saying Rick played within the rules, the other calling it outright theft. But by then, it didn't matter. The damage was done. Parker's secret maps were no longer secret. Every miner in the valley now knew exactly where Dominion's richest layers ran. Within days, Rick struck gold, literally. His crew hit a cleanout so massive it broke Yukon chatter records, 1,200 ounces in just 7 days. Videos of gold bars stacked waist-high flooded social media, stamped and gleaming under floodlights. Rick's investors threw a celebration, posting photos with captions like "Dominion delivers." The timing couldn't have been more brutal. Parker's own sponsors started to waver. Fuel suppliers paused shipments, citing operational uncertainty. Equipment companies delayed renewals. Even Discovery began trimming its field production budget. Behind the scenes, Parker's entire ecosystem was shaking apart. In the crew quarters, silence hung heavy. Men who'd worked beside Parker for years started looking elsewhere. A few quietly admitted they'd received calls from Rick's new operation: better pay, less risk, and a fresh start. By the end of the week, Parker's roster was thinner, his camp quieter, and his own voice lower than anyone had ever seen it. He didn't vent this time, didn't rage, didn't blame. He just stared at the campfire one night and said quietly to Mitch, "He's not mining gold. He's mining me." Still, even with morale collapsing, Parker wasn't done. He returned to the old Dominion survey archives, flipping through maps from before the major dig. The ones that charted underground drift tunnels carved decades earlier by earlier operators. Those maps, half forgotten, showed something no one had checked in years. A sub-channel, buried beneath the current creek bed, leading right under the area Rick had claimed. Parker assembled a skeleton crew, just enough to keep things quiet. Late at night, they loaded drones and ground scanners into a pickup and drove to the back access trail beyond the range of Rick's security lights. The wind howled through the trees, and the drone lights flickered against the mist as they descended into one of the old collapsed tunnels. The signal wavered, then cleared, and there it was. A sealed drift, timber still intact, running directly beneath Rick's wash plant. Dust clung to the beams, untouched for decades. The drone camera panned slowly across the ground, and everyone in the truck leaned in. In the dirt, faint glints reflected back, traces of gold-bearing gravel identical to Dominion's old core samples. And just beyond that, buried under a century of sediment, were Parker's old marker tags, still nailed to the support beams. It wasn't just proof, it was the missing piece. Undeniable evidence that Rick's so-called new strike sat directly atop the same channel Parker had charted 3 years earlier. The geological pattern, the depth, the gradient, all matched Dominion's private data to the inch. The realization hit hard. Rick's record-breaking week wasn't luck. It was the pay layer Parker had already discovered, the one he was supposed to mine this season. Dominion's gold had never changed hands, only the paperwork had, but then the reality set in. That footage, that data, everything they just found, was recorded inside Ground Rick, now legally controlled. If Parker went public with it, he'd be the one facing trespass charges. The smoking gun couldn't be shown without incriminating himself. He sat in the driver's seat, the tablet still glowing in his hands, watching the live feed of the drift. Parker's markers, his work, his gold. All now buried under Rick's claim. Outside, the night hummed with the low grind of Rick's wash plant tearing through pay dirt just a few hundred meters away. Every scoop, every ounce, every roar of the machinery echoed like a taunt across the valley. For Parker, the tunnel changed everything, not just because it proved what Rick had done, but because now he had a secret of his own. A secret that could destroy Rick's new empire if he was willing to risk destroying himself with it. He didn't act right away. Days passed with that footage burning a hole in his mind, until his phone lit up with a number he didn't recognize. No message, no caller ID, just a time and a location. A diner outside Dawson, 1 hour, no cameras, no crew. When Parker walked in, The man waiting wasn't a stranger. He was one of Rick's own investors, part of the Alberta group that financed the takeover. He looked restless, eyes darting to the door, and slid a flash drive across the table. "You didn't hear this from me," he muttered, "but they're planning to cut him out." Rick's gone the moment the season ends. The files on the drive told the rest of the story. Internal memos, investor briefings, projected financials, all outlining a post-season transition that would remove Rick Ness entirely from his own operation. The investors intended to absorb Dominion Creek into their corporate portfolio, sell off assets, and replace Rick with a salaried operator. In other words, Rick was just a placeholder, a name used to mask their acquisition until it was legally secure. The real plan was corporate control, total, silent, and irreversible. For the first time, Parker saw an opening. Dominion had become a chessboard, and for once, he wasn't the one reacting. He spent the next 2 days building a counterstrike, not with machines, but with lawyers, accountants, and one quiet phone call to a private partner of his own. If the Alberta group could buy Dominion through Rick, then he could buy Dominion through them. It was ruthless, but in the Yukon, that was the game. By the end of the week, Parker's proposal was on their desk, an offer to acquire a minority stake in their investment group through a shell company, with guaranteed returns and a buyout clause that would trigger just before their fiscal close. They didn't know who the buyer was. They didn't need to. The deal was structured perfectly, silent, profitable, and wrapped in enough legal layers to keep Parker's name invisible. And they took it. While Rick filmed promotional clips about his record-breaking operation, Parker was quietly becoming part owner of the company that financed him. Dominion was being reclaimed piece by piece, not with bulldozers, but with contracts and signatures. Rick had no idea. Weeks passed before the first cracks showed. Rick's fuel shipments slowed, his parts supplier delayed deliveries, and the investors stopped answering his calls. Then came the freeze. Mid-season, right as the pay streak was at its richest, Rick's accounts were locked pending an internal audit. His equipment sat idle, wash plants silent, crews standing around in disbelief. Something had shifted at the top. The investors had sold controlling interest to a new silent partner. Rick's phone calls went unanswered. He drove into town, demanded answers, and found himself sitting in the same boardroom that had once promised him a comeback. Only this time, the faces were colder. The lead representative handed him a stack of documents confirming the transfer of ownership. Rick's jaw tightened as he scanned the pages, the words blurring until one name at the bottom hit like a sledgehammer. The purchasing entity was a holding company recently acquired by Parker Schnabel Enterprises. The Yukon had never seen a quieter victory. Rick's $75 million empire had just been bought out from under him. Not in a pit, not with shovels, but on paper. Dominion was back under Parker's control. When the cameras finally caught up, Rick was already storming out of camp. The crew scattered to give him space as he shouted across the lot, voice breaking with anger and disbelief. "You bought me out? You actually bought me out?" Parker stood near the dozer line, hands in his jacket. The same calm he'd once envied in Rick now reflected back. He didn't shout, didn't gloat. He just said it once, quiet enough for the mics to pick up. "You took my ground. I took yours back." It was the moment everyone knew. Dominion Creek belonged to Parker again. Within days, the transfer was finalized. Rick's signs came down. Parker's logos went back up. The first trucks rolled in, followed by his old crew, most of them returning without hesitation. For the first time that season, the sound of machinery filled the valley again, echoing through the same ridges that had gone silent under Rick's control.
Well, that definitely does look like the end of the world coming. Should be an interesting next 12 hours. Stay tuned. Well, that definitely does look like the end of the world coming. Should be an interesting next 12 hours. Stay tuned. Well, that definitely does look like the end of the world coming. Should be an interesting next 12 hours. Stay tuned.